Hello, I am Willie Dwayne Francois III, a 2009 graduate of Morehouse College, and I am privileged to say that I was a two-time president of the Martin Luther King Jr. Chapel Assistance Program, and I have the honor today of presenting a staple, an institution, a living institution, an embodied institution in the Morehouse Pantheon, Dean Lawrence Edward Carter Sr. Dr. Carter is the founding dean of the Martin Luther King Jr. International Chapel. He was recruited to come to Morehouse by President Hugh Morris Gloucester. And since those days, he has served Morehouse with great imagination. He served Morehouse with great dignity. And he has built one of the strongest and longest pipelines from college to the American pulpit. And I'm excited to say that I'm not just a student of Dr. Carter, but I see myself as an intellectual son. And there are so many of us that consider ourselves sons, spiritual and intellectual sons of Dr. Carter. And that long trip from Dawson, Georgia to Boston, Massachusetts to Morehouse College. And we are grateful that what happened in 1958, when Martin Luther King Jr. himself recruited Dr. Carter to Morehouse as a 10th grader, has manifested in ways that Dr. King didn't see, in ways that Dr. Carter didn't see, but in ways that have richly blessed my life and so many other Morehouse students, so many other Morehouse alumni. And so I'm grateful today for this privilege to be able to introduce the founding dean of the chapel, a professor of religion, the college archivist and curator, the founder of the Gandhi King Ikeda Institute for Global Ethics and Reconciliation, Dr. Lawrence Edward Carter, as he welcomes all of us into the virtual chapel library and exposes to the world what we benefited from every Thursday that we called Carterology. So Dr. Carter, do what you do best and what only you can do.
Well, thank you so very much, Pastor Francois, for your generosity. I hope it is true that I've had the impact that you suggest. A commitment to strengthening the Christian church for me began when I was 15 years old in Columbus, Ohio. And it came upon me a strong and intense feeling, call it a call, to increase the number of men and women going into the ministry. And I wanted to be a pastor of a church. And I kind of backed into campus ministry under the influence of the Presbyterians when I did an internship at Roxbury Presbyterian Church in Boston. My Carterologies generally are in the chapel library at Morehouse, and I have chosen what to talk about primarily by listening to the chapel assistants, their concerns during the course of the week, things bothering them, questions they have about theology, about scripture, and about ministry. And speaking to you this evening from my home, I'm going to use the same yardstick. I discovered this week in a phone call that I got that one of our former chapel assistants was asked to step down from his pulpit. And when I inquired what the problem was, I was told that he had performed a same gender-loving marriage. And the congregation thought that that was over the line. And so I thought that I might begin by talking to you about self-identification. And I want to begin with a quote from Isabel Wilkerson's new book, Caste: The Origins of Our Discontents. And this is what she says: caste does not explain everything in American life, but no aspect of American life can be fully understood without considering caste and embedded hierarchy. Now, here's where I want you to focus. She continues, this is a civilization searching for its humanity. It dehumanized others to build its civilization. Now it needs to find its own. This is a civilization searching for its humanity. It dehumanized others to build its civilization. Now it needs to find its own. I think this is where we are. We are struggling to find a new understanding, a new definition of humanity. Why is this so important right now? As we are becoming freer, and that freedom is being sanctioned by our highest court. And so some of the things that I have said across the years include that the most fundamental right is the right to self-definition. I have encouraged the students at Morehouse never to let anyone else define you. It is important to be inner directed, not outer or other directed. I believe this is why Jesus said, the kingdom of God is within you. If you want to know the will of God for your life, examine your desires. When you pray, Jesus said, go into your closet. Self-identification is the core of authenticity. If you can overcome ambivalence, your simultaneous conflicting reactions, you can be great. Peace cannot be achieved without the sustained obedience to the unenforceable. How do you achieve this? A simple definition of peace is that it is the integrity of right relationships with oneself, one's neighbors, the community, the environment, the national or larger social order, and the cosmos. I'm trying to describe the optimum environmental aspects for human potential to flourish. This would include attitudes, institutions, structures, and instruments associated with peace. Now, all of these aspects must be associated with the goals of democracy. What are they? Very simply and very briefly, a well-functioning government, equitable distribution of resources, the free flow of information, sound business environments, high level of human skill or education and capital, acceptance of the rights of others, a low level of corruption, good relations with neighbors. But none of that, absolutely none of it, can work without a sustained obedience to the unenforceable. We don't have ethics policemen. When the President of the United States places his hand on a Bible and takes an oath, swears to uphold and protect the Constitution of the United States, when the oath is finished, the people have to rely upon the person taking the oath to be obedient to what cannot be enforced. So how do you achieve this capacity for any of the virtues at a personal level? Well, first, it's so obvious, you have to work on yourself. And that is what education is all about. If you're not working on yourself, you are not manifesting an education. You don't get an education, you manifest an education. This is true in college, at home, in graduate professional school, at work, in public discourse. If you're not working on yourself, not your neighbors, you cannot manifest an education at any level. You don't manifest an education, you reveal an education. It's not something outside of you, Jesus said, it's within you. You came with it. And all of your life, you have to struggle to make sure that culture doesn't squeeze it out of you. You make a career of humanity. The goal is to become a cosmic citizen. For years, we've said global citizen, but I encourage you to expand your address. Become a cosmic citizen. You must broaden your horizon so that you can reveal the qualities of being a moral cosmopolitan, capable of letting your branches hang out across all fences so that nothing can fence you in. The first rule, I think, of interactionism is the capacity to love. We shouldn't be so focused on conflict resolution as we are focused on conflict love-olution. It's always the place you're coming from. We must develop a capacity to love people and our cosmic house. We must be able to come from a place of love. And remember, I have not forgotten that one of the early things I learned about Martin Luther King, as he was fast becoming my mentor, was that every room, every space that he walked into, he conferred, he bestowed love upon every person he encountered. He didn't have enemies. He had misguided friends. You can't give away what you don't possess. That's the significance of coming from within, going within. You cannot transmit what you don't possess. You have to be the thing itself. You can't be an effective pastor if you don't love people, if you're not willing to sacrifice for them, to go the second mile. The first requirement of love is the ability to listen. This is Paul Tillich. Then to know how to engage in turn taking and turn yielding. But if the noise is so loud in you that the noise in somebody else, you have to first work on yourself. Leave your gift at the altar and go get right with the broken relationship. The ultimate norm of decisions, the ultimate norm of decisions, all decisions, is love. Nothing else. Love and justice are the same. For as Martin King said, justice is love equally distributed. Only one thing is intrinsically good, namely love. Nothing else. I believe that people intrinsically are love. I think that's one of the reasons people are so attracted to each other. Love wills the neighbor's good, whether we like him or her or not. I have strong disagreements with Donald Trump, but I want the very best for him. Only the end justifies the means. Nothing else. Decisions ought to be made situationally, not prescriptively. So ethics, at their best, are regulatory. They don't tell you what to think, but they should assist you in how to think. The moral imperative, the ethical ought, the behavioral command receives its unconditional character as we actualize our essential nature. Please understand this. Our essential nature, our created goodness, which is determined by reason, the good, and the true, and the image of God. Everybody's essential nature is Christ, Buddha, Muhammad, Shiva. You name the ideal norm in whatever spiritual or religious tradition you identify with. Whatever personality norm or ideal norm, the moral imperative embodied, revealed, is the act in which we become, in actuality, what we potentially and essentially are. We become a person, a center of autonomous value, not derived. Oh, it's a wonderful thing if your faith tradition is very affirming. I don't think that you can get a higher affirmation than Jesus saying that the kingdom is within you. That alone is a recognition that there's divinity in us. There's some sky in us. The kingdom is within us. Heaven is within us. And Jesus said the kingdom of heaven is like a little child. Now entertain that when you consider that the nation sunk so low that it separated babies from their parents and put them in cages. There are consequences for that, and we will be paying them for a long time. And for those theological types listening to me, everything I've said is backed up by the great theologians. I agree with my dear friend, theologian, philosopher, religionist, Robert Cummings Neville, when he says, the closest thing to an essential or essence of human nature, the closest thing to an essence of human nature is having the obligation to take responsibility for being part of the history in which we ourselves are engaged, and including that in one's orientation to the orientation points of reality. Now that is a tremendous yardstick by which to understand why the coronavirus is spiking in the United States. We witness a deliberate attempt by our federal administration not to take responsibility, which says an awful lot about the essential or the essence of the human nature leading us. Your potential must become your destiny in a historical context. We are obligated to be responsible persons to our history. As humans, we're not good at following a value system. So how can we improve? Well, people are inquisitive and relational. We are social animals, and we want to know how things connect. We create value. The work of the church, the mosque, the synagogue, the temple, the spiritual center is all about value creation, affirming life. The foundation of thinking is not reason. Please hear this. The foundation of thinking is not reason. It's value. If you can figure out what a person's values are, then you'll better understand how they reason. So given the current political and cultural climate in our nation, you may ask, how can we create balance in our local communities? We cannot have what we are not willing to be. It's so simple and yet profound. We must better understand that our means and our ends, said Gandhi and King, must agree. Our means and our ends must agree. The end goal you wish to achieve must be pre-existent in the means that you use, the means you choose. The goal you're seeking must be pre-existent in the means. We must use soft power, dialogue, to overcome negative tension and fear. It was Marie Curie who said, "Nothing in life is to be feared. It is only to be understood. Now is the time to understand more so that we may fear less." My valuing orientation had its infancy in my mind at the age of 4, when I had my first conscious encounter with racism, playing barefoot on the red, sandy dirt road in front of our house in Dawson, Georgia. I looked up and saw 3 plainclothes white men walking down the center of the street with rifles. I had never seen a gun before. And I heard my grandmother call for me to get Benny, my pet puppy, dog, and come in the house. I got Benny, went in the house, and went to the window in time to see those 3 white men fire their guns into the yards of our neighbors. And I heard the dogs squealing in pain from the bullets striking them. And as I watched those men pass our house, I knew at the age of 4, I knew instantly, while holding the mouth of Benny so that he wouldn't bark, that this was not happening in the white community. Civil and human rights leaders and activists need to form more partnerships in order to deal with the current climate in the United States. Partnerships with civil society leaders in addressing these crises that continue from our first arrival on this continent through slavery. We should be more inclusive in our consultations, inviting a diversity of professionals, ethicists, clinical psychologists, theologians, women, police, government officials, and yes, children. It's amazing to me how little this kind of diversity is summoned to address what's happening in community. I want to share with you a couple of thoughts about where we are, and I will conclude with this. Many white Americans are full of fear toward African Americans. When you're fearful, you've chosen wrongly. Prejudice, racism, and anti-Semitism are full of fear. And fear is the enemy of freedom. It is the enemy of democracy. Fearful people must change their minds, which will transform their behavior. And this is a matter of willingness. Learning, listening, dialogue, and visiting. Fear is a divine alarm clock. It is the indicator that we are believing something that is not true. It's a wake-up call and our reminder to choose truth. Fear is pain. pushing us to choose healing. And so, putting in what Abraham Lincoln left out, we need governments of all of the people, by all of the people, and for all of the people. I think that's enough for this evening. Let's find out how much damage I've done.
Thank you, Dean. Another classic carterology you've offered us today. And you explored some very existential themes. You explored some themes that really strike at the core of how we define, how we situate our anthropology, particularly our theological anthropology. How do we understand our relationship to one another as it relates to God, as it relates to our understanding of the sacred, and which I think is really powerful. And if there are any questions, please put those in the chat, and we will get to your questions. One of the questions that surfaced for me, Dean, as you were centering love as a fundamental part of the moral life, as you were giving great attention to love, it took me to a person that you referenced, Paul Tillich, and Paul Tillich cautions us about to think deeply about how love can change the laws, how love interacts with the laws of justice and the structures of power. And so I'm interested, Dean, in you helping us think through what is the relationship between love and power, and love and justice. How do you? I know King had some articulations of that, but I'm interested in you offering us, how do you understand the relationship between love, power, and justice?
Okay. Power without love easily becomes arrogance. Power needs a humbling element to move it toward empathy. Any state of affairs cannot be maintained or sustained without certain norms and virtues being actualized. One of the things that has been said over and over again by the Republicans on Capitol Hill is that we do not need empathy. And they have demonstrated that they are capable of operating without it. I mentioned the best example I could give. I was horrified by the separation of those children from their parents and putting them in cages. In my life, I never imagined that the American government could ever stoop that low. If you don't bow down to something, you can't bear the burden of yourself. Humanity without authentic love, a capacity to identify, the ethics of identity. If you cannot identify with the anguish, the pain, the suffering, the discomfort of people, there's no way you're going to be able to preside humanely, ethically, justly, in a healthy way, or in a hopeful way, without the capacity to reveal, to demonstrate, to actualize, to fulfill, to parade a capacity for empathy, then you're a candidate for dancing with evil and being the incarnation of what very often in the church is called the devil. I don't believe in the devil. You can't have two ultimates in a universe. And devil worship and focusing saps the energy we need to focus on the highest qualities of divinity. But when you make decisions in the direction of demonizing virtue, then you are preparing yourself to corrupt whatever power and authority has been given to you through an election or an appointment. Power is neutral. It is what it looks like, feels like, sounds like when we choose to make a move without taking into account the community. Let me come at this a different way. Leadership. People have always had ideas about leadership programs and what makes a leader. I happen to believe that leaders are not born and leaders are not made. I think leaders are discovered, and they're discovered in crisis. The community discovers a leader when they hear a person speak and address a particular problem, and they listen for how that person defines the problem and how we got there and what we need to consider to get out. And when the person is finished speaking, which is what happened to Martin King when he had just 5 minutes to prepare what would be the most decisive speech of his life after he'd been named president of the Montgomery Improvement Association. After he made that speech in an overcrowded church, the people rose, gave him a standing ovation, and conferred upon him. They bestowed upon him power and their willingness to follow him. He wasn't the leader just because he was named president. He became the leader when the people discovered that he had a vision and a series of definitions that they could identify with that seemed right, because he didn't demonize anybody, and he talked about a win-win solution, not an I win and you lose solution. Power is a gift. Many people try to snatch power. We've just come through many examples of that. It seems to me that power has an awful lot to do with democracy. with the consent of the people. And what is amazing to me right now is that Donald Trump's refusal to acknowledge Joe Biden as president-elect is the clearest, strongest refutation and denial of the fourth branch of government, we the people. And the people spoke. 5 million votes more for Biden. It seems like a mandate for me, because the amount of electoral votes that Trump got was, what was it, 213 or 214, compared now to Biden's 290. It may actually be higher than that. So I'm not quite sure how you heard all of that relating justice and power and love. One of the mistakes that is made in Orthodox Christianity is that people think that you can live your life emphasizing one commandment, one virtue. I often think about the fact that Howard Thurman emphasized the will to love. Martin King emphasized the strength to love. And William Sloane Coffin emphasized the courage to love. Which one of them is right? I happen to think you need them all.
Wow. That strikes me. If I can just throw a fourth idea about love, and asking you, thinking the way I read Baldwin, who I consider a great Democrat, in terms of small d Democrat, one who believes in the power of democracy, and the role of love in manifesting that democracy. But it seems like Baldwin's approach to love is connected to some type of vulnerability, right? The capacity to be vulnerable, the risking of oneself. Where does vulnerability fit in terms of developing in developing as moral leaders, in developing our moral imagination? What's the role of vulnerability?
Well, I think Baldwin is absolutely correct. Whenever you are going to try to be helpful, and especially in a crisis, you have to engage in taking a risk. You don't always know how people are going to respond, and neither do you know how much it's going to cost you. I was telling my wife just a few days ago, I was reminding her of an experience that I had when I was a camp counselor in Camp Wheeler in Ohio, and I couldn't swim. And to my surprise, the head of the camp assigned me as a lifeguard in the deep and told me to go sit in the lifeguard's chair in the deep water. And the campers knew I couldn't swim, and the other camp counselors knew I couldn't swim, but the director told me to go sit in the chair. Jake Young was his name. And I smiled, and I climbed on up, sat in the chair, and a little boy jumped in the deep water after I had been there maybe an hour, jumped in the deep water, and the little boy couldn't swim. And he got in trouble, and a number of people saw it. And they looked at me, and before they could even comment, I jumped from my chair into the water. I knew I couldn't swim. And in the air, I was more intensely aware that I couldn't swim because I wasn't sure what I was going to do when I got in the water. But my capacity to identify, my capacity for empathy, knew I had to do something. And I convinced myself that I was going to save that little boy and I wasn't going to drown. So I hit the water and I went right down to the bottom and I pushed myself back up. And when I got to the surface, I grabbed the little boy and started dog paddling. I don't know that I had ever dog paddled in my life, but I had heard about it. And I held him up until somebody else jumped in the water and helped with the little boy, and I dog paddled over to the dock to a standing ovation. Now, I still can't swim. When I get in the water, I displace a lot of water. So what have I said to you? You have to have a desire to be helpful. You have to want to do something, to make a difference. And somehow, there's that somehow theology, the Lord will make a way. Now, I'm not encouraging anybody to do what I did. And that's a kind of extreme or radical example. But vulnerability, this is to me what Calvary is all about. It's about extravagant love being spilled all over Golgotha. Extravagant love, not cheap love. A tremendous price was paid. I often think of Gardner Taylor's statement in our homiletics class at Harvard. He said, evil is almost almighty because God had to throw in almost everything he had, even his only begotten son, in order to wrestle evil into control.
That's good, Dean. I see here that Reverend Terry has in the chat. If power without love leads to arrogance, we see vulnerability as the humility of love.
That's good. I can go there. I think when you become aware of how fragile life is and how quickly and easily you can lose it, irrespective of how much material wealth and resources you have, irrespective of your education, the letters behind your name, or even the color of your skin. There is something that humbles you and causes you not to think too highly of yourself. You aren't so inclined to look down upon the homeless when you're passing them in your car, or they're begging for money at the street corner when you stop at the light. Every day I live, and the older I become more sensitized to how precious this experience is. And I can look back and I can tell you, I was much more carefree and unconscious. And I deliberately use that word, unconscious, in my 20s and 30s. I had the strength of a bull in my neck, and I thought this would just roll on forever. But now in my 7th decade, and at the end, every little thing seems miraculous to me. And I can see the parade of people who I looked up to. They're all gone. The people who mentored me, they're all gone. And now I am the elder. God plays an interesting trick on us. Hindsight is 20/20 when you're a senior citizen. You can see things you can't see when you're in your 30s and your 40s. It's all so brief. I am stunned at how fast it has gone by. And I think it goes by fast when you're meaningfully engaged. But I don't think there's any more magnificent career than that of ministry. They say that teachers are the most contented professionals. That's what all the statistics reveal. And the chapel assistants have made me feel like my life has been worth living. Every now and again, I wished I made more money, but I don't dwell there because all my needs are met.
And there are many of your students that wish we made more money as well. Dean, I think we're rounding out our time. But one of the great contributions that I think you make and this is just one of many that you make in the intellectual evolution of your students, is this turn to personalism, this push, this nudge for us to think about personalism as theological and philosophical systems, but really at the heart of seeing the person as ultimate, seeing the which allows us to see the human being as autonomous centers of value, as I think you pin in Global Ethical Options. I wonder, as we think about personalism and we think about what does it mean to be a faith leader? What does it mean to be a politician? How do we, and I think I've asked you this before, how do we hold the tension of naming the dignity, the autonomy, the agency, the inherent goodness of the human person alongside our critiques of racism, capitalists? How do we hold that in balance of being able to critique those who are the guardians of hegemonic power, destructive power, while also maintaining our deep commitment to the autonomy, the dignity, the value of all persons?
How do we hold personalism in relation to what we see going on?
How do I, yes, that's the question, but just to put in historical context, what is a personalist critique of a Donald Trump?
In my opinion, though personalism is not a popular philosophy by name, I think that its effect on the 20th century is at the front of the line of the philosophies. Why? because, contrary to the behavior of Donald Trump and the Republicans on Capitol Hill who refused to impeach him, to remove him from office, even as they saw him weakening our democracy, undoing what 44 presidents tried to keep in place and Lincoln giving his life for. The personalists work against the dehumanization and the marginalization of people. The last 4 years of our federal administration has done just the opposite. Big time. And yesterday, the Supreme Court voted them down on wanting to rob 20 million Americans of their health insurance. If you have a weak concept of axiology, values, you remember my statement? Reason is not the foundation of thinking, but values are. So what does Donald Trump value? What do the Republicans value? Money would be at the top of the list. Donald Trump values himself, power, property. He doesn't value any of the ideals and the norms that sustain community, except the community of the very rich who got the big tax break that he got passed. He wanted the presidency so he could make money for his businesses, his golf courses, and his hotels. Well, this is a belief in materialism run amok. The personalist is interested in human flourishing, irrespective of your particulars, race, gender, sexual identity, economics. It is interested in equality, and even though they deny it, the end goal is a social democracy. That word has been so demonized, the Democrats are afraid of it. And they want to blame Bernie Sanders for what happened in Florida. That it frightened the immigrants from Cuba who already had lived under Fidel Castro's socialism, and they didn't want to go back to that. But we're practicing some form of socialism every time the government bails out American industries. Social Security is socialism. Andrew Yang's universal basic income is socialism. And all the help that the government just gave us with this pandemic, sending checks to protect families and small businesses, that's socialism. It's like we're running from our own shadow. I want to go in a little deeper, but I need to hear the question put to me again. What part of it have I not addressed?
No, no. I mean, you're definitely giving me new ways of thinking about this. It's so easy for us, and I hate to restate it because I know we're out of town. But it's so easy, particularly for those of us who live in the prophetic tradition, that we make people equivalent to their ideas. We reduce people to their ideas, to their actions, and but as a personalist, if I believe in the fundamental dignity, agency, and value of the human person,
Mm-hmm.
how do I begin to critique the racist, and critique the sexist, and critique
Okay.
the homophobe
Okay.
as a person?
You don't reduce them to their bad decisions.
Mm.
You don't. I guess this is a statement about philosophical reductionism. Martin King, looking at the segregationists and refusing to stoop to use tactics against them that they wanted to use against him. When he broke their laws, he said, I break them because I think they're unjust. They were not democratically put together. They support the uplift of white personality at the expense of black personality. So I break them fully prepared to demonstrate the highest respect for the law by my willingness to accept your penalty. But I break the laws openly in order to arouse the conscience of the public against the injustice. And so the one thing that I think everybody likes about Biden, even though they tried to vilify him for it during the presidential debates, was his willingness to go across the aisle. He had some good things to say about the Southern senators and those who are clearly espousing a segregationist or racist view. Some of our extreme left-wing Democrats use that as a reason not to vote for him. But it's very important for Biden to continue what he has started, and that is not to be seen before the camera responding to every bad bit of behavior that Trump exemplifies by filling the air with negative labels, dignified cussing, or undignified. It's very important that he lead with the end in mind, so that the end is pre-existent in the means he's showing up with. You have to, if you're going to lead people toward truth, you have to be filled with truth. This is the beauty and the power of diversity maturity, to go back to how I started, and the big hurdle the church is going to have to jump, because heteronormativity is not privileged. The pastor who performed the same gender-loving marriage was abiding by federal law. The church mistakenly thinks somehow that the heteronormative members of the church own marriage. They've forgotten that when people get a divorce, they don't go to the pastor. You don't reduce people's humanity to their gender or to their sexual expression. We are more than any of our component parts. We are gestalts. We are wholes. And we are not to have ministries that fragment people. The great United Methodist Church has let itself become split by homosexuality, further breaking the already badly broken body of Christ. So it's very clear they are not living up to the moral imperative of the one who they claim to love. The norm of the church is Jesus. And he held a crown above the head of the woman caught in adultery. Where are your accusers? Go and sin no more. And we are just too confident in our rightness, not realizing that it's based on cultural consensus, based on cultural conventions, and not on respect for everybody's humanity, including the humanity of our oppressors. Personalism is all about affirming the ultimate dignity of every person, regardless of their culture, regardless of their religious practice, regardless of their personal economies, whether they are single or divorced. And the Christians are super hypocritical in that Jesus didn't get married. And we always seem like pushing our young people to get married like they're half a person if they're not. I mean, this is a terrible state of affairs we're in. Everybody ought to be free to love whomsoever they choose. It's a wonderful thing when people are in love because it means they're serious about caring for each other, taking care of one another. And so the judges are right when they take a child from a heteronormative mother or father and give the child to a gay couple where the child is in a much more stable home. We have absolutized too many social conventions. And as a result, the church is going to get weaker. It's certainly becoming more hypocritical. And the Roman Catholic Church has a lot of homework to do in this regard. And so I think the Pope did say what is reported to have said about same-gender loving marriage, but you notice how the cardinals have tried to walk it back. Yeah.
Sure.
But you see, what they're not telling you is that this Pope Francis had those views when he was a cardinal in Argentina. And they knew he had these views, and that's why they elected him. You see, they are trying to change without changing. They knew he was going to eventually say that. Interesting little games we play. Well, it's apparent to me now that I will not be around to see many of the things that I have worked for completely fulfilled. But I'm very happy that I've seen them come a long way.
I love it, Dean. I love it. Well, thank you, Dean, for the peerless way that you are able to tie together so many complex ideas and relay them in ways that are not just digestible, but in ways that are deeply actionable, in ways that we can begin to process our minds and really transform our own relationship to democracy, to humanity, and to the sacred. So this was just like being 21 again, 20 years old again, sitting in the chapel library, just gleaning from your immense wisdom. And I've seen so many of my classmates or people who were in Morehouse at my time, during my time, who have equally benefited from being a part of this experience. And so thank you, Dean, for your unswerving commitment to liberation in ways that I don't know that we always talk about, the way that you are a great model of the Black prophetic tradition. And so,
well, congratulations to you on your new teaching position at New York Theological Seminary.
Yes, thank you. I started 2 weeks ago, so I'm 2 weeks in of being an academic now.
You want to tell the audience what you're teaching?
Yes, I am currently, as of 2 weeks ago, I now serve as the director of the Master of Professional Studies program and assistant professor of liberation theology at New York Theological Seminary. And the MPS program, the Master of Professional Studies, is one of the few master's awarding programs in theology in a prison. We operate the MPS at Sing Sing Prison. And so this job gives me an opportunity to live in the intersection of theological education and criminal justice reform. And we're excited about the wonderful ways that we get to move the conversation forward about mass incarceration and the role of theology in undoing the particular evil of hyper incarceration.
Mm-hmm. Well, congratulations. You mentioned Sing Sing Prison.
Yes, Sing Sing Prison is one of the maximum security prisons in the state of New York, and the MPS program, the Master of Professional Studies program, the program that I'm now giving leadership to which I'm giving leadership, it's based at Sing Sing Prison. So I have teaching responsibilities in Sing Sing Prison, and also in the main campus in New York City.
Well, that's wonderful. We'll have to have you back to talk about your experience.
I would love to. I would love to do that. It will be a unique journey, but it lives at the intersection of questions and practices and communities that I've been thinking deeply about since I was in those chairs in the chapel library. So it is a unexpected manifestation of a life's passion. And every day that I log into a meeting or pick up a phone call, I'm reminded that you told me that I am fast becoming what I will be.
Yeah, you're there, doctor. Okay.
Okay. Well, thank you, Dean. So everyone, thank you all for tuning in today. This was the last midweek chapel experience for the semester. And I know that the chapel assistants have been greatly enriched by it. The entire Morehouse community is benefited by the work of Dr. Carter, but the work of the pre-seminarian program that is the premier pre-seminarian program that is the chapel assistants program. And so this is the last of the midweek meetings. And this Sunday, there is a rare gift that will be offered to the Morehouse community, to the chapel community during Vesper Hour for Greek Sunday. We will have the Reverend Dr. Gina Stewart, who is the pastor of Christ Missionary Baptist Church in Memphis, Tennessee. She is one of the best preachers in the world. And so in the English speaking language, you do want to hear Dr. Stewart this Sunday at 5:30 for Vesper Hour. And I imagine she will be not just preaching, but I imagine she'll also be present for some engagement for sermon talkback, which is a staple in the Morehouse community. So not only do you get to hear the sermon, but you get to hear the narratives, the process behind its construction, and the lived realities that feed those sermons. And so thank you all for logging in. Again, we celebrate the Reverend Dr. Lawrence Edward Carter Sr., and we salute his more than 4 decades of just being a faithful steward of Morehouse College. And we cannot thank him enough for sticking around when other people would have left Morehouse, because it is hard work to keep this greatness at Morehouse alive and sustained. And so we're grateful that he's given us more than 4 decades. So that's all for tonight. We hope that you'll be with us on Sunday. And until then, peace.